Hey everyone, it was nearly a year ago since my unpopular opinions video for DBD. This time round I thought I would come to you, because a lot of the original opinions in the last video are still just the same for me. So let's see what you think and your unpopular opinions on the game. First off, we have a comment here from Blip. Hex Ruin is a bottom 5 killer perk for strength, and easily the worst hex perk. The only reason why I disagree with this is that there are other, even worse perks, and a perk that regresses gens passively, even when weak, is more beneficial than a bunch of other perks to me. For example, Dying Light, Forced Penance, Furtive Chase, Gearhead, Hangman's Trick, Overwhelming Presence, Predator, Insidious, Beast of Prey, and Territorial Imperative. I do agree that it is a lot worse than people realize though. Apparently it's actually just the equivalent of a passive basic kick regression now, meaning you really aren't getting much value. With that said, I think there is value still there, particularly against uncoordinated teams. For the second part of this opinion about it being the worst hex, I think I do actually agree at this point, with a lot of the other hexes becoming much more popular. The only ones I would maybe say are weaker are Haunted Ground or Lullaby, but that's definitely an interesting point I think. Harambe says toolboxes, keys, and potentially even maps all feel somewhat useless, and either need to be reworked to make them actually interesting and fun to play, or else removed. I hardly ever see anyone running anything other than a medkit or flashy, unless they're doing a certain challenge or are bringing brand new part. This I agree with, and it's something I've mentioned in the past. It's a fairly large issue I think that over half of the survivor items are just dull or just straight do not do much or anything really. It's quite a lot to overhaul, and I don't think it's anywhere close to priority, but I would like to see it happen. I think this is a fairly unpopular opinion still, with lots of people still considering toolboxes and even keys powerful. I think it's more to do with evening out the power of all items, compared to now, where some have a use and the others just feel like they don't, or not enough comparatively. Withermaster 9000 says Overcome is better than Sprint Burst. Nice and simple one. Which I do not agree with in the slightest. I think this possibly stems from the relatively recent changes to the post-hit speed boost in 6.1.0. However, I don't think it justifies Overcome being stronger than Sprint Burst. Overcome has a lot of issues, the main one being that it requires a health state to activate, which instantly restricts it, compared to Sprint Burst's ability to be used whenever. Overcome is restricted purely to chases, where Sprint Burst can be used for map traversal, chases, and can even be available multiple times in a chase if played well. The post-hit cooldown can be bad at times, but the way I see it, if you use Sprint Burst to just get away from the initial hit, why bother losing the health state first with Overcome? Overcome does provide a lot of distance, but it is fairly situational. Exhaustion perks like Smash Hit or Balance Landing. I see where they're coming from, but it's a no for me. RPD shall return this year says old RPD was a tolerable map and should return to the game. I mean, the keyword here is tolerable, so I don't exactly disagree with it directly, although I do think the current version is better, and therefore I find it very unlikely for the map to actually return. I largely agree though, the map was fine, or at least in line with other maps released around the same time. The issue being that none of the maps released recently have been okay. I'm not completely against this opinion, but the only thing that makes me disagree is that the new versions are a whole lot healthier, I think, and so I don't see why they would add the old version back. Chef Demo says Boons are overrated. Nice and simple, and one I do agree with. The only boon I would actually consider strong is Circle of Healing. The others are all fairly mid, or in Dark Theory's case, just bad. I agree with this one, not much to say. I think really this is more how people classify boons. When someone says, are you bringing a boon, they mean, are you bringing Circle of Healing? Jaden says, gens don't need a change. They are fun enough as they are. The skill checks are a perfect combo between focus a bit on them, but still being able to look around to see the killer coming. This one I do think is actually quite unpopular, with each side kind kind of debating, oh, it should be longer to complete a gen, oh, it should be shorter, or comments surrounding things like gens needing more difficult skill checks, or just more difficulty attached to their completion. So it's interesting to see someone say that gens are just straight fine. I don't agree with this purely for the fact that gens have almost always been an issue for people, and one of the most talked about issues, as it were. So I think if it's on people's minds as an issue, then therefore gens aren't okay. Things like 90-second gens and the just boring gameplay of sitting on one when nothing is happening around you is an issue, I think. I will say though that the second part of the statement I do agree with more, about the combo of focus and looking around. I just wish they'd heighten it a bit more, I guess, to be how it is now, just to a slightly greater extent. More curveballs on gens, maybe a feature where you need to collect parts. Whatever it is, just some extra things relating to gens, but the base concept of gen focus and awareness I do agree is a good design in the game. Fadein8466 says self-care is better than Circle of Healing because you don't need to scour for a totem. Interesting. This one I can imagine being pretty split, but I do think it's an unpopular opinion. Most people I imagine would tell you to bring Circle over self-care. The main thing I would criticize about this argument is that it seems to be focusing purely on self-heals, when really the reason why Circle is so good is because it acts as a healing point for the entire team, and only takes up one perk slot, and only for one person, whilst also being more effective than self-care. It is undeniable though that self-care can be used instantaneously, which has always been a strength of the perk. So it kinda just depends how you look at this one, I think. That one moth says behavior is doing a fine job, you guys are just mean. I do think I agree with this. Looking at the state of the game 6 years ago, you can see just how much progress it's made. And I think denying that for the sake of some things you don't like is pretty silly. With that said, they aren't perfect either, and some decisions I think are perfectly valid to criticize them for, and equally shouldn't be reduced to, oh, you're just being mean. Basically, criticism is fine as long as it's valid and has basis. On occasions it does, on others it doesn't. So I'm kind of 50-50 on this statement, because it depends which situation you're referring to. As an idea overall though, yeah, I think they are doing a good job, and criticism is largely overblown. Afterlight MC says there should be more master challenges in the tome, and less normal challenges. This is another I agree with. I do think there should be a greater focus on the tougher challenges in the game, and less with focus on just general actions or tome challenge fillers like complete gens and stuff. I think a better scale of more rewards for tougher challenges, and less overall fluff challenges would really help the tomes to feel more meaningful, and would simply make them a great extra thing for more hardcore players to work on. The reason why I haven't completed a bunch of the tome challenges is because they are just the same thing repeated, and many take multiple games to even complete, which would be fine if the thing you were doing was interesting, or the reward was more than a bit of BP. J Tarak says Billy needs a rework. He's the lowest picked killer and used to be the highest. Sag. I'm not too sure if he is the lowest picked at the moment, but I do definitely agree that he needs a rework. His last rework was the one where he received the overheat changes, and whilst I think just going back on those may be the easiest route, I think maybe doing something a little more significant could be more interesting. The intent behind the overheat changes wasn't entirely flawed as an idea, but I do think the execution was fairly flawed. And whilst it was mostly addressed in the patches post the Billy changes, it still feels fairly bad to play him, and newer maps have only made him feel worse. Current Blight feels like a stronger version of older Billy, and Blight is like untouchable when it comes to nerfs. So I feel like some of Billy's should be reverted, and he should be restored closer to his original state. Finally, boring redacted username says even though the new maps are neat and the new balance changes are nice, old DBD was more fun, scary, and overall better than current DBD in my opinion. I would be okay with losing the newer license killers if we could have back the old movement and old maps. This I do think is fairly unpopular, with the game currently being in a better state than it was. I think it's largely a nostalgia thing, looking back, remembering the old times, and forgetting how there was bad stuff back then too. I agree though that there was a certain charm to some of DBD's old jankiness, particularly with the way the characters moved. The general tone of the game does feel less spooky now too, which I'd agree with, so I definitely agree with that part. Overall though, I wouldn't agree, and I think the game is better off now. Kind of linked to this, we have another comment. AZHYMOVS, open brackets, Flopper King, close brackets, says, I think the game is generally just very boring since its main aspect, horror, was lost. The game feels very straightforward, and is just uninteresting with what it has now. This I wanted to address quickly, but basically I think this will happen with horror things. Horror largely works on the unknown, and for a multiplayer game like DBD, that fades fairly quickly, even with all the content. I understand this take though, and I know a few people who feel this way. I would like to see more attempts to reintroduce horror into the game though, a bit like they tried to do with Dredge, it seems at least. I'm not too sure how to say this name, says, Twins' greatest strength is that nearly nobody plays them. This I don't think is too unpopular, but I wanted to mention it because I think they are entirely right. Twins get a huge advantage over a lot of other killers, purely because their player numbers are so low. I think the most recent stats we got on pick rate for them, they were barely over the 1% mark, and the least picked character. I think this does even extend to things like content available for them, where there's guides for almost every character, or even multiple in different formats. For Twins, there's like 2 people off the top of my head who've made guides, and I would trust learning from. There's a few opinions that were submitted that I liked, but I think were a bit too popular, or just widely agreed on, or just a bit too subjective, I guess. So I want to show some on screen now. Alright, well that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed, and be sure to let me know your unpopular opinions on DBD down below. Thanks, and goodbye. Oh yeah, and nerf pig.